The first thing I noticed wasn't the alien queen. It was the scar. A thin, pale mark wrapped around her wrist like a memory that refused to fade. The kind of burn you only get when you grab something you shouldn't. Not by accident, not by carelessness, but by choice, by sacrifice. The glass halls of Oris Prime shimmered around her, towering crystalline arches bending light into impossible colors. Diplomats, nobles, and observers filled the chamber in carefully arranged clusters, their voices low, their movements precise. And yet, around her, there was space. Too much space. They didn't bow. They didn't greet her. They didn't even look at her. They avoided her. Subtle at first, a turned shoulder, a redirected step, a sudden fascination with the architecture. But once you saw it, you couldn't unsee it. The most powerful being in the room, and everyone treated her like something contagious. Like a mistake. She moved through them with perfect composure, her posture regal, her expression unreadable. But isolation has a weight to it. You can feel it, even when it's hidden behind a crown. I should have looked away like the others. I didn't. My eyes kept drifting back to her wrist. To that scar. It didn't belong on someone like her, not on a queen surrounded by luxury and guarded by an empire. That scar belonged to someone who had chosen pain. And for some reason, that mattered to me. Maybe because I recognized it. Maybe because I had my own scars, the kind no one could see. She reached the center of the hall, and for a moment, the light caught her skin just right, illuminating that mark. And then she stopped. Not completely. Not enough for anyone else to notice. But I did. Her head turned slightly. Her eyes found mine. And in that single, quiet moment, I realized something I couldn't explain. She knew I had seen it. They needed a human hostage. That's how Ambassador Reynolds put it. Calm, neutral, like he was discussing supply logistics instead of handing someone over to an alien empire. A political guest, he added a second later, adjusting the cuff of his suit. Standard interspecies treaty framework. It ensures mutual trust during negotiations. I stood near the edge of the delegation platform, half listening, half watching the room below. The Valith nobles had reformed into their careful patterns, clusters of power and quiet judgment, all orbiting around a center they refused to acknowledge. Around her, Queen Elora stood near the base of the central dais now, speaking with one of her advisors. Or maybe listening. It was hard to tell. The others leaned away from her ever so slightly, as if proximity itself was a risk. They'll select one of ours, Reynolds continued. 12 candidates have already volunteered. Military mostly. Decorated, stable, politically reliable. 12. I glanced toward the human section. They stood in a clean line. Uniforms pressed, posture perfect, faces controlled. The kind of people who understood sacrifice in the structured, official sense. The kind that made sense on paper. Unlike me. Jake Carter. Cultural analyst. Chicago-born. No rank. No command experience. No one important enough to matter. No one important enough to be missed. Reynolds turned slightly, lowering his voice. You're not required to stay for the selection, Carter. Your role here is observational. Observational. Right. I nodded, but didn't move. My attention had already drifted back to her. The Queen. Elora. She had shifted position, and for a brief second, her sleeve pulled back just enough for that scar to catch the light again. There it was. Clean. Deliberate. Not recent, but not old enough to fade into insignificance either. The kind of mark that stays because the moment behind it matters too much to disappear. Something about it pulled at me in a way I couldn't explain. It wasn't just curiosity. It was recognition. A flicker of something buried deep. The same quiet understanding I'd felt standing in the wreckage 2 years ago, staring at twisted metal and knowing, with absolute certainty, that everything that mattered was gone. Loss leaves a shape inside you. And sometimes, you see that shape in someone else. They'll announce the final selection at dawn, Reynolds said. Until then, we maintain protocol. Protocol. Right. I exhaled slowly, forcing my gaze away from her and down to the polished floor beneath my feet. I wasn't supposed to be part of this. I wasn't trained for it. Didn't qualify for it. And yet, that image wouldn't leave my mind. Her standing alone. Everyone turning away. That scar. I looked back up. She was moving again, heading toward the far exit of the hall. The crowd parted in front of her, not in respect, but in avoidance. A silent current pushing her forward through a sea of people who refused to touch her orbit. And just before she disappeared beyond the archway, she hesitated, barely noticeable, but I saw it. A fraction of a second where her composure slipped, where her hand flexed slightly at her side, fingers tightening as if holding onto something invisible. Pain, not physical, something deeper. My chest tightened before I could stop it. I knew that feeling too well. 12 candidates, Reynolds repeated, glancing at his datapad. One will be chosen. The rest return to Earth. One stays. The words settled heavily in my mind. One person left behind on an alien world, surrounded by people who didn't want them there. A symbol, a guarantee, a living reminder of a fragile alliance. A hostage. I looked at the line of soldiers again. They were ready, prepared, willing, but none of them had looked at her. Not really. Not the way I had. Not the way she had looked back. My pulse slowed. The noise of the hall faded into the background. And for the first time since Reynolds had started speaking, I made a decision. Add my name. The words left my mouth before I could reconsider them. Reynolds blinked, turning toward me. Excuse me. I'm volunteering, I said, more steadily this time. There was a pause. A long one. You're not on the candidate list, he said carefully. You're not military. You don't meet. I understand their culture. I cut in. I speak their language. Better than anyone else in the delegation. That's not the point. It should be. He studied me now, really looking. And I knew what he saw. Not bravery. Not duty. Just a man with nothing tying him back to Earth. A man who wouldn't leave a gap behind if he never returned. This isn't temporary, Reynolds said quietly. You could be there for years. I know. You'd be alone. A faint, humorless smile pulled at the corner of my mouth. I already am. Silence stretched between us. Behind him, the 12 soldiers remained perfectly still, unaware that someone entirely unqualified had just stepped into their place. Reynolds exhaled slowly, rubbing his temple. This is highly irregular, he muttered. The conclave won't expect. They don't have to expect it. Another pause. Then, reluctantly, he turned his datapad toward himself and made a small adjustment. A single new line added to the list. Jake Carter, cultural attaché, volunteer. That doesn't mean you'll be chosen, he said. I know, but even as I said it, I looked back toward the archway where she had disappeared, and something in my chest told me that wasn't true, because she had seen me, and I had seen her, and somehow, that felt like it mattered more than anything else in that room. If you've watched this far, then this story is really interesting to you. Please confirm it by clicking like under this video. It doesn't cost you anything, but it will help me understand what story to publish for you next. Let's move on. The selection ceremony took place at dawn, or what passed for dawn on Horus Prime. A slow shift in the crystalline sky above the conclave chamber, where light filtered through layered glass structures and refracted into soft gold and pale violet. It didn't rise like a sun. It unfolded. The chamber itself felt less like a hall and more like a cathedral. Black stone columns stretched upward into impossible heights, intertwined with living crystal that pulsed faintly, as if the building itself was breathing. Rows of Valith nobles filled the tiers in precise formation, their presence heavy, expectant, quietly hostile. At the center stood the 12 candidates, 11 soldiers, and one mistake. Me. I stood at the far end of the line, my civilian attire a sharp contrast against polished military uniforms. Every detail about them screamed discipline, readiness, purpose. Every detail about me screamed the opposite. I could feel the weight of eyes on my back. Human, Valith, diplomatic, judgmental. A quiet ripple of confusion had already passed through the chamber when my name was announced among the candidates. A cultural analyst? An attaché? It wasn't just unusual. It was an insult. Remain still, Ambassador Reynolds had whispered before the ceremony began. Let the process play out. Easy for him to say. My pulse was steady, though. Strangely steady. Like I'd already crossed some internal line, and there was no going back. At the far end of the chamber, the doors opened. Silence fell instantly. Queen Elora entered alone. No escort. No ceremony. No attempt to soften the tension that followed her like a shadow. She moved with the same composed precision as before, her silver-gold garments flowing like liquid light across the dark floor. But here, under direct attention, the isolation around her felt even sharper. The nobles didn't avoid looking at her now. They stared, cold, critical, waiting. She ascended the dais without hesitation and took her place on the throne, a structure carved from layered crystal that caught the ambient light and fractured it around her like a halo made of glass. Still, she looked alone. The High Arbiter stepped forward, his voice echoing through the chamber. The terms of the treaty stand as agreed. One human representative will remain on Oris Prime for the duration of negotiations. The selection shall be made by her radiance. Formal, detached, final. One by one, the candidates were called forward. Each soldier stepped ahead with precision, delivering their credentials, their service history, their reasons for volunteering. Words like duty, honor, alliance filled the air. Strong, expected, safe. Elora listened without reacting. Her expression didn't change. Her posture remained perfect. If she felt anything, she didn't show it. But I wasn't watching her face. I was watching her hands. Subtle tension, fingers tightening against the armrest. A controlled stillness that wasn't as effortless as it appeared. Then, Jake Carter. The name sounded wrong in that space. Too simple, too human. A ripple moved through the chamber. Whispers, confusion. I stepped forward. Every movement felt louder than it should have, like I was breaking some unspoken rule just by existing there. I stopped at the base of the dais and did the only thing I knew would matter. I bowed. Not the diplomatic version, not the shortened, efficient gesture most humans used. I lowered fully, deeper than required, palms open, exposed, the Valeth sign of trust. A murmur swept through the nobles. I didn't look up immediately. When I did, she was already watching me. Not with indifference, not with curiosity, recognition. You are not military, she said. Her voice was quieter than I expected. Smooth, controlled, but there was something beneath it, something real that didn't translate through tone alone. No, I replied. You hold no strategic value. A few nobles shifted, amused. I held her gaze. I understand your people. Silence. A dangerous kind. You would be insignificant, she continued, her head tilting slightly. A poor choice for a hostage. There it was. The dismissal. The expectation. The room leaned into it. I didn't. With respect, I said carefully. A soldier represents strength. A pause. But understanding builds something stronger. Another ripple. Not approval. Not yet. But attention. Her eyes didn't leave mine. And for a moment, everything else faded. The chamber. The nobles. The weight of expectation. It was just that look. That same look from the hall. She knew. You speak as though you see more than what is presented, she said. I tried to. A longer silence this time. Then, she stood. The movement was sudden enough to break the stillness of the chamber. The nobles shifted, uncertain. I have made my selection. Tension snapped tight across the room. No one breathed. The human. A pause. Just long enough to matter. Jake Carter. The reaction was immediate. Voices. Sharp. Disbelieving. Angry. A civilian? An insult. A mistake. I didn't hear all of it. Because she was already descending the dais. Moving toward me. And this time, no one stepped in her way. She stopped close. Closer than protocol allowed. Close enough that I could see the faint patterns beneath her skin shifting in soft, unreadable colors. You saw it, she said quietly. Only for me. My breath caught. The scar, she added. No point denying it. Yes. Another pause. Not uncomfortable. Measured. And you still stepped forward. I swallowed, keeping my voice steady. Yes. Her gaze searched mine for something. Fear. Doubt. Regret. She didn't find it. Something shifted in her expression. Subtle, but real. Then you will remain, she said softly. Not as a command. As a decision already made. A final one. I had expected to feel something at that moment. Fear. Uncertainty. Maybe even regret. Instead, there was clarity. A strange, quiet certainty that I had just stepped into something far bigger than a political agreement. I understand, I said. And I meant it. Even if I didn't fully know why. She held my gaze for 1 second longer. Then, for the briefest moment, her hand moved. A slight shift. Not quite touching mine, but close enough to feel the intent. Then it was gone. The distance returned. The queen again. Prepare him, she said, her voice carrying across the chamber. Ensure his safety. Safety. The word landed differently than it should have, because the way she said it didn't sound like duty. It sounded like a promise. And as the nobles erupted behind us, outraged and uncertain, I realized something I hadn't expected. I had become the alien queen's hostage, and for some reason, she had just decided to protect me. The palace was beautiful in the way a cage can be beautiful. Everything shimmered. Walls grown from living crystal curved into impossible shapes, catching light and bending it into soft waves that moved across the floors like water. The air was always the same perfect temperature. No drafts. No noise unless it was meant to be heard. Precision. Control. Distance. My quarters were located in the eastern wing, far enough from the central court to keep me out of sight, but not far enough to forget I existed. A diplomatic balance. A hostage's balance. The rooms were large. Too large. Every surface polished. Every detail intentional. A place designed for someone important, or someone being observed. The observation wasn't subtle. Sensors embedded in the walls pulsed faintly when I moved. Servants came and went on schedules that were just irregular enough to feel natural, and just consistent enough to track patterns. And sometimes, when I stepped into the outer corridor, I caught glimpses of nobles passing by who didn't bother hiding their curiosity or their contempt. I was tolerated. Nothing more. Days passed, then a week, then another. Routine settled in, the kind that fills space but not meaning. I studied. I translated. I reviewed cultural archives that I already knew better than most people on Earth. And still, I kept thinking about that moment. The selection, the way she had looked at me, the way she had said safety. It didn't fit. None of it did. The first summons came on the 15th day. No escort. No ceremony. Just a quiet message delivered through the room's interface. Her radiance requests your presence. Requests, not commands. That was new. The throne room was empty when I arrived. No nobles. No guards in sight. Just the vast open chamber, silent except for the faint hum of energy moving through the crystalline structures. And her, Elora, stood near the panoramic window at the far end of the room, looking out over the crystal forests of Orus Prime. From this height, the structures below looked like frozen waves of light, stretching endlessly beneath a sky that never quite settled into one color. She didn't turn when I entered. "You have been studying," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "What have you learned?" I stepped closer, careful but not hesitant. "That your people value perception as much as truth." A pause. "Explain." "They see what confirms their expectations," I said, "and ignore what doesn't." That got her attention. She turned, fully this time. "And what do they ignore?" I met her gaze. "You." Silence. Sharp. Dangerous. But I didn't look away. "They've already decided what you are," I continued. "So they don't look for anything else." Her expression didn't change, but something in the air did. A shift. Subtle but real. "And what have you decided I am?" she asked. The question wasn't casual. It carried weight. Risk. I exhaled slowly. "I think," I began, choosing the words carefully, "you're someone who made a choice they didn't understand." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "What choice?" I hesitated. Then, I took a step closer. "May I ask something first?" A pause. "You may ask. You may not answer," I added. Something almost like amusement flickered across her expression. "You learn quickly." "I try." Another silence. But this one felt different. Less hostile. More open. I nodded toward her wrist. The scar. There it was. The shift. Not in her posture. Not in her voice. But in something deeper. Controlled, but not entirely. "You observe too much," she said quietly. "Occupational hazard. That mark is irrelevant." "No," I said just as quietly. "It's not." The temperature in the room didn't change, but it felt colder. "Explain," she said. And there it was again. Not dismissal. Not avoidance. Engagement. I took a breath. "I've seen something like it before," I said. "In a classified report. A human evacuation mission near the outer colonies. There was an incident, containment failure, a reactor breach." Her expression didn't move, but her hand, barely, a slight tension. "Enough." "The report mentioned an unidentified individual who intervened," I continued. "Someone who stabilized the system long enough for evacuation to complete. They didn't stay. They didn't report. But they left behind evidence." I nodded again, more subtly this time. "A burn pattern." Silence. Long, heavy. The kind that presses against your chest. "You are making assumptions," she said. "Am I?" Another step. Closer now. Too close, by diplomatic standards. "Why would an empress have a scar like that?" I asked. "Something that doesn't come from war. or training, or ceremony. Her gaze locked onto mine. Sharp. Searching. Why would she carry something like that and let everyone believe she's broken? That word lingered. Broken. It hit something. I saw it. Just for a second. Then it was gone. Buried. You speak with confidence for someone in your position, she said. I speak as someone who's seen what people do when they don't understand something. A pause. Then, quieter. They reject it. That landed. Not loudly, but deeply. The silence stretched again. But this time, she didn't dismiss me. She didn't turn away. She didn't end the conversation. Instead, she stepped closer. Slow. Measured. Close enough that I could see the fine details in her skin, the subtle shifts in color that I still didn't fully understand. You believe you understand me, she said. No, I replied. I think I recognize something. What? I didn't hesitate. Loneliness. That word didn't echo. It settled. Heavy. Real. Her gaze didn't break, but something behind it softened. Just slightly. You are not what I expected, she said. Neither are you. Another pause. Then, very quietly, you should be careful, Jake Carter. There it was again. Not a warning. Not really. Something else. I thought I was the one being watched, I said. You are. Then why does it feel like you're the one at risk? That did it. For the first time, her composure cracked. Not completely. Not enough for anyone else to notice. But I wasn't anyone else. A flicker. Gone in an instant. But real. Because, she said softly, you see too much. And for the first time since I arrived on Oris Prime, I understood something clearly. I wasn't just a hostage. I was a problem. For them. And maybe, for her too. The truth didn't arrive all at once. It came in fragments. A line buried in an archive. A missing timestamp. A report that ended too cleanly for something that should have left damage behind. And the scar. Always the scar. I started where I knew I could. The cultural database. The diplomatic records. The historical logs that no one bothered restricting because no one expected a hostage to understand what they were reading. That was their first mistake. The Valeth documented everything. Not always truthfully, but thoroughly. I spent hours tracing small inconsistencies, cross-referencing evacuation timelines from human space with Valeth fleet movements. There had been an incident 3 years ago, officially classified as a localized containment anomaly on the edge of a neutral corridor. Minimal losses. Rapid stabilization. No external involvement. It didn't fit. Human reports told a different story. A transport convoy caught in a cascading reactor failure. Evacuation incomplete. Systems collapsing faster than predicted. The kind of situation where survival wasn't expected, only damage control. And yet, the ship hadn't exploded. Not immediately. Something had delayed the chain reaction. Something or someone. The report I had seen years ago came back to me in sharp detail now. A classified note attached to the final log. Unidentified intervention. Unknown origin. Thermal damage consistent with direct contact with unstable core shielding. Asterisk asterisk. Direct contact. No protective barrier. No remote systems. Someone had physically reached into a failing reactor and held it together long enough for hundreds of people to escape. No name. No species. No explanation. Just a scar. I sat back from the terminal slowly, the pieces aligning in a way that made my chest tighten. There was only one problem. That kind of act wasn't something the Valeth rewarded. It was something they punished. I requested access to internal court records next. That took longer, not because they were hidden, but because they were fragmented, redacted, edited in ways that removed context but left enough behind to suggest something had been deliberately erased. 7 cycles ago, that's when it started. Queen Elira's defect. That's what the nobles called it. A failure to bond. A deviation in emotional response. An instability that made her unfit by their standards. The official version was clean. Too clean. Her consort had rejected her publicly. Declared her incapable of forming proper neural bonds. The conclave accepted the claim without investigation. No medical verification. No independent analysis. Just accepted. Because it was convenient. Because it gave them a reason to isolate her. Because it explained something they didn't want to understand. I leaned forward again, pulling up the timeline. 7 cycles. 3 years in human terms. The same year as the reactor incident. The same year the unidentified rescuer vanished. The same year Elira became defective. My pulse slowed. The connection wasn't subtle anymore. It was obvious. She hadn't failed to bond. She had chosen something else. Something their culture didn't allow. Compassion over protocol. Action over control. She had touched something she wasn't supposed to. Saved people she wasn't supposed to care about. And in doing so, she had broken the one rule her entire society was built on. Distance. The pieces locked into place. The nobles didn't avoid her because they feared she was broken. They avoided her because she proved they were wrong. Because if she could feel, if she could choose empathy over detachment, then everything they believed about themselves fell apart. And that was something they couldn't tolerate. A soft chime broke the silence. A message. Her radiance requests your presence. Again, I didn't hesitate this time. The walk to the throne chamber felt different now. Not uncertain. Focused. When I entered, she was already there. Not by the window this time. At the center of the room. Waiting. You have been searching, she said. No accusation. Just certainty. Yes. A pause. Why? I stepped closer. Because I knew now. Or close enough. Because they're lying about you. That landed. Not like a shock. Like something expected. You assume much. I know enough. Silence. Then, say it. It wasn't a request. It was a challenge. So I did. You didn't fail to bond, I said. You chose not to follow their rules. Her expression didn't change. But her eyes. There. A flicker. You intervened, I continued. During a human evacuation. Reactor breach. You stabilized it manually. A step closer. They called it an anomaly. Classified it. Buried it. Another step. But they couldn't erase the consequence. I gestured slightly toward her wrist. That. The room felt smaller now. Tighter. Compassion isn't a defect, I said quietly. But in your empire, it might as well be. For a long moment. Nothing. No response. No movement. Then, she turned away. Not in dismissal. In restraint. You see patterns, she said softly. You connect fragments. Yes. And you believe that gives you truth. No, I replied. I think it gives me a chance to ask the right question. A pause. Then, I stepped closer. Close enough that this time, I didn't stop myself. Why did you do it? The question hung between us. Heavy. Unavoidable. She didn't answer immediately. Her hand moved slightly at her side. Fingers tightening just enough to betray the control she was holding on to. Finally, when you lose control of a system like that, she said slowly, the expected outcome is total failure. I know. You calculate losses. Accept them. Move on. That's what your people believe. Yes. A longer pause. Then, her voice shifted. Not in volume. In truth, I did not accept it. I didn't move. Didn't speak. You call it compassion, she continued. They call it deviation. Her head tilted slightly, though she still wasn't looking at me. And perhaps they are correct. No, I said. That made her turn. Sharp. Intervening meant risk, she said. Not just to myself. To everything. The mission. The protocol. The balance of power. And you did it anyway. Yes. Why? There it was again. The real question. The one they had never asked. Or never wanted the answer to. Her gaze locked onto mine. And for the first time, there was no mask. No one else would, she said. Simple. Quiet. Absolute. The words settled into the space between us. And in that moment, everything made sense. The isolation. The rejection. The silence of the nobles. They hadn't abandoned her because she was broken. They had abandoned her because she had done something they never would. Something they couldn't understand. Something they refused to become. You saved them, I said. I altered the outcome. You saved them, I repeated. A pause. Then, very softly, yes. The admission didn't sound like pride. It sounded like relief. Like something that had been held in for too long. You let them believe you were defective, I said. Another pause. They needed an explanation. And the truth wasn't acceptable. No. Silence. But this time, it wasn't heavy. It was clear. You're not broken, I said. Her gaze didn't waver. No, she replied. And for the first time, it sounded like she believed it. Then, quietly, you should not have learned this. Why? Because now, she said, you understand why they fear me. I held her gaze. They don't fear you, I said. They fear what you represent. A longer silence. Then, just barely, something shifted in her expression. Not quite a smile, but close. And in that moment, I realized something that changed everything. I hadn't just uncovered her secret. I had stepped into it. And there was no going back. The attack came at night. Not sudden, not chaotic, planned, precise. I woke up before I understood why. Something was wrong. Not loud, not obvious, just off. The kind of silence that feels heavier than it should. The kind that presses against your instincts until they snap you awake. The room was dim, lit only by the soft ambient glow of the crystal walls. Everything looked the same, but it wasn't. I sat up slowly. That's when I saw the shadow. It moved wrong. Too controlled to be accidental. Too deliberate to be anything but intent. I didn't have time to think. The blade came down fast. I rolled off the bed instinctively, the strike slicing through where my chest had been a second before. The impact shattered part of the crystalline surface behind me, fragments scattering across the floor like frozen light. Pain hit a fraction of a second later, sharp, burning across my shoulder. Not deep, but real. I pushed through it. Adrenaline has a way of simplifying things, reducing the world to movement and reaction. The attacker didn't speak, didn't hesitate. Valith, male, darkened crest, deliberately muted to avoid identification. Professional. He came at me again. No warning, no wasted motion. I grabbed the first thing within reach, a heavy crystal structure from the side table, and swung. It connected. Hard. The sound cracked through the room. He staggered. Not down. Not yet. Fast. Faster than I expected. He recovered and lunged again, blade aimed lower this time. More precise. More lethal. I shifted sideways, barely avoiding the strike. The edge caught my side this time, slicing through fabric and skin. Closer. Too close. I hit him again. And again. Each movement less controlled than the last. More force than technique. I wasn't a soldier. I wasn't trained for this. But I had something he didn't expect. I had nothing left to lose. That changes how you fight. The third strike connected clean. The crystal shattered against his head, fragments embedding into the surface beneath. He stumbled, balance finally breaking. I didn't stop. I couldn't. The fourth hit dropped him. The room went still. The only sound left was my breathing. Sharp, uneven, alive. I stood there for a second too long, staring down at the body, trying to process what had just happened. Then, the doors burst open. Guards flooded in. Too late. Always too late. And behind them, her. Elora moved faster than I had ever seen. No hesitation. No distance. No control. Jake. My name. Not formal. Not distant. Real. She crossed the room in seconds, ignoring the guards, ignoring protocol, ignoring everything. Her hands were on me before I could react. Checking, searching, assessing. You're injured. I'm fine. It came out rough. Unsteady. Not entirely true. Her grip tightened slightly. You are not fine. Her voice. Not composed. Not controlled. Fractured. I blinked, trying to focus. He was targeting me. I said, I think. No. Sharp. Immediate. Her gaze snapped to mine. Not you. A pause. Then quieter. Me. That landed harder than anything else. The guards were already securing the room, scanning the attacker, identifying, recording. But none of it mattered in that moment. He came through my quarters, I said slowly. You were collateral. The word hung in the air. Ugly. Accurate. If you had died, she continued, her voice tightening, the treaty would fracture. Humanity would withdraw. The alliance would collapse. The pieces clicked together. They wanted to remove you, I said. Yes. And blame me. Yes. And without the alliance, I would stand alone. That last part wasn't political. It was personal. Her hands were still on me. Still checking. Still making sure I was there. You almost died, she said. The words were quiet, but they carried weight. You chose me, I replied. I volunteered. That does not make you expendable. Something in her voice changed. Not royal. Not distant. Something else. I was supposed to be, I said. That's the role. No. The word came fast. Stronger than anything she had said before. No. She repeated, quieter this time. That is what they wanted you to be. A pause. Then, her hand tightened slightly against my shoulder. Not to me. Silence. The guards shifted in the background, waiting for orders that weren't coming yet. Because she wasn't finished. They calculated risk, she continued. They assumed outcome. Her gaze didn't leave mine. They were wrong. I let out a slow breath. They're going to escalate this. Yes. They're going to push harder. Yes. And you. I will respond. The way she said it. Calm. Controlled. Final. Not reaction. Decision. You protected me, I said. It wasn't a question. Her expression didn't change. That is my responsibility. No, I replied. That's not what that was. A pause. A long one. Then, very quietly, no, she said. It wasn't. We stood there for a moment, the weight of everything settling in around us. The attack. The truth. The shift. Because something had changed. Not just in the room. Between us. The distance that had existed before. Gone. Replaced with something else. Something the nobles would never understand. Something they would never accept. And something they would definitely fear. Her hand moved. Not away. Closer. Deliberate. For a second. Just a second. She didn't care who was watching. Rest, she said softly. You will recover. And you? I do not require recovery. That almost sounded like a lie. I studied her. You almost lost control, I said. That got her attention. A flicker. You abandoned protocol, I continued. You came in here without hesitation. A pause. You chose me. Silence. Then, I already did. The words were quiet, but absolute. Behind us, one of the guards cleared his throat carefully. Your radiance, the conclave will demand. They always do. Her tone shifted instantly. Cold. Controlled. Untouchable. But it didn't reach her eyes. They will demand explanation. Accountability. Consequences. They will receive none. A pause. Then, they will receive something else. The guard didn't ask what. Didn't need to. Because whatever it was, it had already started. She looked back at me one last time. Not as a queen. Not as a ruler. As someone who had just made a decision she couldn't undo. You were never meant to survive this, she said quietly. I know. Another pause. Then, neither was I. That landed. Different. Deeper. Because for the first time, I understood something clearly. This wasn't just about politics anymore. This wasn't about treaties. Or hostages. Or alliances. This was about something far more dangerous. She had chosen me. And now, there was no going back. For either of us. The conclave chamber was louder than I had ever heard it. Voices clashed. Nobles argued. Accusations filled the air, all directed at her. At us. The defective queen, who had broken every rule, and the human who should have remained a silent guarantee. I stood beside her anyway. Not behind. Not below. Beside. They call you broken, I said quietly, just loud enough to carry. The chamber fell into uneasy silence. But you were the only one who chose to save lives when it mattered. A ripple moved through the nobles. Unease. Doubt. Fear. Elora stepped forward then, her presence cutting through the noise. They demanded a hostage, she said, her voice steady. A symbol of trust. Her hand found mine. This time, she didn't hide it. I choose something else. The shock was immediate. A bond, she continued. Not of obligation, but of will. All eyes turned to me. I didn't hesitate. I volunteered to be her hostage, I said. But I stayed because I saw who she really is. A pause. Then, I choose her. Silence. Heavy. Then breaking. Not into outrage. Into something uncertain. Because the truth had shifted. The scar they feared was proof. Not of weakness, but of strength. And for the first time, they didn't look away. The alliance wasn't built on fear anymore. It was built on something far more dangerous. Trust. Thank you for listening to this story to the end. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Write in the comments what moment in this story impressed you the most. And also check out the other videos that just appeared on your screen. See you in the next video.